I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. David Mellor, my guy. You've obviously seen his face a billion times if you've been to Fenway Park. He's the king of the grounds crew here at Fenway. The author, an author now, One Base at a Time is the name of the book that I read in 2 sittings that I just told you. So we're going to get to talk about the book. But first, how long have you been at Fenway for?
It's my 19th season here at Fenway, 35th in the majors.
What was the first season at
2001.
Fenway? 2001. And then, before that, Milwaukee. So we have that connection. I'm a pseudo Brewers guy. You're a Brewers guy. So I want to start at the very beginning. So one of the things that I found most interesting was that you wanted to play professional baseball. That was always your goal. So you wanted to play professional baseball, and now you're doing this as a career. Everyone knows you for this job. But so people will ask me and be like, hey, how did you get to where you are? Is that always what you wanted to do? And you have to give them a, hey, don't give up type message. Because I did it for 8 years without getting paid, and there were times where I wanted to give up. I stuck with it, and now it's my career. But you had to pivot at one point because you were forced to. You were absolutely forced to. So take me back to the very beginning. How did you become a baseball fan, and when did you think? When was your first realization point that being a big leaguer is that's on the table?
My grandfather played in 1902 in the majors, and my dream, just ever since I could remember, I played baseball. And my family was from Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. My dad grew up in Rhode Island, and I was raised to be a Red Sox fan. Mm-hmm. So I was a Red Sox fanatic, even though I grew up in Ohio. And I just everything I did was baseball, and played baseball in high school. And my junior year of high school, I started having colleges reach out to me, and got invited to some invitation workouts for some pro teams. And I realized then that there were some opportunities for scholarships if I worked at it. I certainly had the heart for it. I just had to develop my skills. And
you're a smart guy. Then you had a bunch of scholarships in college after the fact, too. So you were working hard in college.
Yeah, I certainly tried.
Yeah. So, obviously, there's the goal there. When was the first time? We have to talk about the first accident because there were 2 accidents. And the central theme here is obviously the PTSD and how there's not necessarily a stigma, but there's definitely a misperception that you can only get PTSD from military, the unseen scars of war. That's not true. So your first accident, take me back to the McDonald's.
Yeah, July 10th, 1981. I was walking into a McDonald's restaurant, and a car came off the street, and they stopped right where the sidewalk was still slanted at the entrance. So I stopped, and they got out and changed drivers. So I waited for them to get back in, and I motioned for them to start driving, and they motioned for me to start walking. So I started walking, and I heard them rev their engine and squeal their tires. And I had enough time to turn, and I put my hands up and lifted my left leg. And that's all the time I had. And the car came at a high rate of speed, hit me, threw me 20 feet in the air, and I slammed into the brick wall right where the door jutted out at the entrance, and slammed into the wall and crumpled into the corner. And luckily, I landed right in the corner, because as soon as I looked up, the car was coming at a higher rate of speed and ripped the handrail out of the cement and pinned the handrail and the car's bumper against my knee against the wall.
So this was someone that thought that it was the brake and ended up hitting the gas?
Yeah, she said she panicked. She stepped on the gas instead of the brake.
How old was this person?
She was in her early 40s, did not have insurance. She was a part-time stripper. And
oh my God!
It was a freak accident.
So and then obviously you end up in the hospital, and then how long was the recovery time here?
I walked on crutches for 2.5 years, walked with a cane for 10 months, had to learn how to walk again, and had a horrific injury during that recovery phase in physical therapy.
Yes, and so you're obviously a guy that you were able to forgive the driver. the physical therapists, like, they had you doing things that at that stage of recovery you shouldn't have been doing. So you're attempting to walk again, and what happens?
The therapist put way too much weight on my leg, had me lay on my stomach, and told me to do hamstring curls. And when my leg got almost all the way up, the weight shifted. My hip stayed flat on the table, and my ankle bounced off the floor, shredding all the ligaments in my leg.
And that's unforgivable. Like, obviously with the driver, okay, it's an accident. Like, accidents happen. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. This is someone that should know better.
Yeah, they should have known better. Definitely it was above what was prescribed, and it changed my world. I woke up from surgery, and I said to the doctor, how soon can I play baseball again? And he said, you're not going to play baseball again, and held up his fingers and said, you'll be lucky if you walk normal again.
And that's accident number one.
That was when, I realized, that was when my dream of making it to the majors as a player, I knew wasn't going to happen.
So it's interesting you say that, because I know that in like professional wrestling, there's a bunch of guys that have had these injuries, and the doctors will straight up say, you're never going to do this again. Like, you'll be lucky to live like a fully functioning life. Was there any part of you after being told, like, hey, you're not going to play baseball again, that you were like, well, like, let's see, like, maybe I could be the exception to the rule?
My at that point, my exception was, I'm going to prove him that I can walk normal again.
Yeah.
And then I can have a so-called normal life.
Yep.
And my family had encouraged me that, all my life, my dad died when I was 3, and they'd always told us that adversity makes you stronger. And when I was hit by the car, they'd encouraged me to look at each challenge as a detour, not as a roadblock, and to find a career that I'd love to do.
Yep.
And if I couldn't play baseball, to find that career I'd love to do.
Yep.
Because so many people don't like their job.
Right.
And so I'd already had started thinking, what do I love? I grew up taking care of people's lawns and enjoyed it. I enjoyed science in school. I wanted to be outside versus in an office all day, and I loved baseball. Mm-hmm. So I figured someone had to be a major league groundskeeper.
Mm-hmm. So how did you begin that process? I mean, because there's people that get lucky. It's like, hey, I know someone who knows someone. It's a networking thing, or was it simply just, I need to try my hand at this?
Yeah, I knew no one. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. I literally sent out a letter to every major league groundskeeper introducing myself, and I heard back from 5 groundskeepers. Groundskeeper with the Expos, who said, I'm sorry I can't help you. Heard back from George Toma with the Royals, who sent me a 16-page handwritten letter, encouraging me to follow my dream.
16 pages?
Yeah, isn't that incredible?
That's crazy.
Roger Bossard with the White Sox wrote me an incredible letter saying, let me know however I can help you. Sam Neufer, who was the groundskeeper with the Braves at the time. Joe Mooney, here with the Red Sox.
So Joe Mooney, I'm only familiar with that name because one of, like, a relative of mine was telling me, like, the legends of Joe Mooney and how, I mean, he ran this place with an iron fist back in the day. He said something like I don't know how they got in here, but they, like, broke in or they were, like, in here late, and, like, they, like, took a bunch of, like, the Red Sox equipment and then went down to, like, a baseball field in East Boston and used it, and then, like, returned it, like, days later, and, like, Mooney, like, didn't care as long as, like, they brought it back, but he was, like, rip shit up until that point. So what's your best Mooney story?
He had a serious bark, but he was like a grandfather to my girls.
Yep.
He was an incredible mentor to me. I'm here because of him.
Yeah.
He called me out of the blue and said, David, I'm thinking about retiring, but I'll only retire if you replace me. Mm-hmm. And I'm honored to follow in his footsteps.
Mm-hmm. And it didn't start right there, though.
He was incredible to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you've been with the Red Sox for 19 years, but your journey in this profession didn't start here at Fenway Park. How did you get in? How did you get your first job? Obviously, you sent the letters out to everyone else. Like, how is there a match? Like, how is there, like, all right, we'll give you a shot, and then how did you prove yourself?
My brother lived in Milwaukee at the time, and told me if I could get a job with the Brewers, I could live with him during the summer to save money. And so I just sent many, many letters and phone calls to the Brewers and kind of became that squeaky wheel.
Mm-hmm.
I think they probably just got tired of me.
Like, let's just hire this guy so he stops reaching out.
Exactly. And they said, hey, we'll give you a chance to work on the day crew. And I was lucky. And I'll never forget the first day I worked there. We got done breaking down batting practice after BP and watered the infield, and I was holding the hose for the boss, and I noticed all the other grounds crew left. And I went up to the boss and said, hey, how can I help? And he said, why don't you just wait over by the camera pit, and I'll let you know if I need anything. And a few minutes later, I saw a guy riding an elephant come through the left field gate.
What?
And it turned out he was a used car salesman there for some kind of promotion. And literally a few steps onto the track, an elephant leaves a big pile of crap. And my boss says, hey, go get a wheelbarrow and scoop that up.
No.
So I go running back to the crew area. And, of course, all the groundskeepers are there. They knew this elephant was coming.
Yeah.
And they say, hey, welcome to the show.
Oh,
go have fun. And, I follow this elephant around, and my wheelbarrow's overflowing with elephant crap. And I get back to the ground crew area, and they're giving me the business. And, I couldn't have been happier. First day in the majors. It was great.
Yeah, so that was your example of rookie hazing, then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, first gig is a heaping pile of elephant shit. So now the second accident was also in Milwaukee, which the first time I heard the story, I was like, there's no way. Like, I'm not hearing this correctly. It's almost like the lightning striking twice thing, but the second time is literally insane how this happens. I mean, most of us live our entire lives, thankfully, never getting hit by a car. This is the second incident where this goes down, and it's not in front of a McDonald's. You're on the field, in Milwaukee. How does this happen? Obviously, I've gone through the book, I've heard the story, and it adds up after the fact, with the situation that the driver was in. But with you, how does this happen? How? Walk me through this entire story, because it's quite literally unbelievable.
Yeah, it was a beautiful fall day in October. We had taken all the sod off the field and graded the field out, and the next day we were expecting sod to be delivered, and there were offices underneath the bleachers. And in the off season, employees would park their cars right outside the office door. And so I had spoken to them to say, hey, please don't have your cars behind the bleachers tomorrow, because we'll have semis and forklifts. So the next day arrives, we're waiting for the sod to be delivered, and raking around an irrigation head in left field. And we had big double gates behind the left fielder for field access. And I heard a car, and I'm certainly hyper aware of car noises. And I thought, that's weird. And when I turned, I saw a car coming toward the field. So I ran across the warning track to where the gates were open and put my hands up and screamed for this car to stop. And this lady smiled as big as she could and stepped on the gas and came right at me. And she hit me. I hit the windshield, and I landed in a pile right on the warning track, right next to the wall pads where the gate was open. And she went speeding down the warning track and got behind home plate and fishtailed and made a rooster tail of track material that went probably 10 rows up into the stands. And a couple crew members ran over to me and said, are you okay? What can we do? And I said, please call 911 and we had big steel delivery gates behind the bleachers. I said, please close those up so she can't get away. And as I was laying against the wall pads, she followed the warning track and pretty much the contour right against the edge of the grass, followed the curve of the grass. And as she started to get closer to me, instead of following the grass edge, she changed the direction of the car and aimed right at me. And my heart was racing already, but it literally just went right in my throat, because I thought, oh my God, she's going to literally run me right over. Mm-hmm. And at the last minute, she swerves to miss me, locks up the car, stops beside me, sits up in the car, and aggressively waves and waves and waves at me, sits down, steps on the gas, peels out, and goes through the gate and covers me in track material. And, my heart's racing, and I'm trying to gather my composure. and I can hear her screaming all of a sudden, and every word's a cuss word. I mean, every cuss word you've ever heard, she's just screaming. And I pull myself up against the wall pads and limp out behind the bleachers, and she's out of her car, and the security gate, wooden gate, is splintered on the ground, and she's dressed in a business suit and a trench coat, and she's screaming cuss words at the guard, and every once in a while she'd look up in the air and her eyes would roll up in her head and just screaming, literally, every cuss word you can think of. And I notice her car's still running. So I go over to turn it off because I didn't want her to run someone else over or drive on the field. And as soon as I turn the car off, she turns and just runs right at me. And she's spitting at me and cussing, give me my fucking keys. And I said, I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't do that. And she gets in the car, slams the door, and locks the door. And about that time, shortly thereafter, the deputies arrive. I explain to them what happened, and I give them the keys, and they tell her to get out, and she won't, and they unlock the door, and she grabs an ink pen out of the console and tries to stab the deputies. So they handcuff her and put her in the back of a squad car. They said, David, before you go to the hospital, do you mind filling out this police report? And so I'm filling out a police report, maybe 5-10 feet away from where she is, and in the car, and they open the back window because it's a beautiful fall day, and they walk over to her and say, ma'am, why are you here? And she starts screaming at the guard or at the deputies, and she said that she's there to do a stunt for the movie, and if it doesn't work, she's supposed to kill herself. And it's a Thursday, and so instead of taking her to jail, they take her to the mental hospital. And on Sunday night, I get a phone call from an attorney that said, we'd like you to come testify against her tomorrow in court, otherwise they're going to let her go. I said, well, if she's this unstable, I don't want to be the only person there. And they said, well, no, there'll be other people there to testify. And so I went to the county mental hospital, and there's a regular courtroom, just like you see on TV, in the hospital. And she's in her room in a straitjacket and waives her rights to appear in person. And so the deputies testify, I testify, and doctor testifies and says, look, she has a past history with mental illness. 1991, she was arrested in Florida for stalking Julio Iglesias. 1993, she was arrested on international charges, threatening the Queen of England, demanding to be adopted, or she was going to hurt the Queen. And the night before she did this at County Stadium, she tried to assault Oprah in Chicago, but she got away. But the Oprah security team got a picture of her and her license plate. And it turned out she had the same clothes on from the day before. And so the judge says, well, we can keep her for 2 more days till we have another hearing. So I go back on Wednesday, and this time she's there, and she's on her 5th attorney since Monday. And so she's at the table with her attorney, and I'm sitting across the aisle, like one row back, and she's just staring at me the whole time, just giving me the hairy eyeball. And so,
like it's your fault.
Yeah, she's literally just giving me the death stare. And so we all testify, and judge says, well, we can keep her for 6 months or till we find a medicine that works. And the judge puts the gavel down. She jumps up and starts screaming at the judge and telling her, don't tell me what to do, and cussing at the judge. And her attorney says, settle down. This isn't the way to work. Don't act like this. And she puts her finger in her face and says, you shut the fuck up. You work for me. And she lunges across the aisle and starts shaking her hand at me and says, I want to know, did I come within 1 foot, 2 foot, or 3 foot of hitting you? Because I always miss at 1 foot. And the judge said, clear the courtroom. And they were subduing her on the ground when I left. And it turns out because of her rights as a mental patient in the state of Wisconsin, they could not take her driver's license away. All they could do is sign her up for a retest. And the doctor said if she took her medicine in the morning, she'd be able to pass the test in the afternoon. And she also got to pick the date and the time of the test.
Is this something that has been reviewed and changed since? Because that is asinine.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Did they change it?
I have no idea.
We need to look into that, because that is absolutely insane. That anyone with a rational thinking brain could be like, no, just take your medicine, you'll be fine, and you can just go back out into the world. That's the craziest story I think I've ever heard. And for you, I mean, take me back into your mind. Like, does it bother you to talk about it now?
It did before. I've gone through September 10th or September 23rd, 2010. I was reading Smithsonian magazine, Acupuncture, and it was another lucky day in my life where I opened this magazine and came across an article about a new treatment facility for veterans dealing with post-traumatic stress. And I thought I would read this article to learn about what my daughter was doing when she was interning at the home base program, which is an incredible treatment facility here in Boston. The Red Sox do with Mass General to help veterans with TBI and PTSD. And the first paragraph listed 12 symptoms of PTSD. And when I started reading that article, literally chills just ran through me and tears started pouring down my face because I could literally feel these symptoms that I either actively had or had dealt with 10 of these 12 symptoms. And the only ones I did not have were suicide or drug use. And, I had, for 29 years, I had 1 to 5 vivid, lifelike nightmares every night. I mean, I was scared to go to sleep at night.
Yeah, and you were like waking up your family, and how long, because of like the way that your body was at that point, you were like sleeping in like a recliner, you couldn't even sleep in a bed. How is that? How much stress do you think that brought on your family, and do you think that gave you guilt? Because I remember you were also talking about in the book about did you find work to be an escape from that?
I had a lot of guilt and shame for not being a better dad, not being a better husband.
Yeah, the part that hit home with me was when you said that I think it was your daughter said, like, when they drove past Fenway, like, that's where Daddy lives. Yeah.
The busier I kept myself, it seemed my symptoms weren't as active. And as a result, my family suffered. And then when I would go home and I wasn't as active with my family as I wanted to be because my moods would swing and, things would trigger flashbacks from, simple things from revving engines, car smells, exhaust. Heck, McDonald's French fries could trigger a flashback.
Right.
And that could be anything from chills to sweats to me just wanting to be by myself. And there was times where, after dinner I would go down to our basement and drink beers to just hope it would make my nightmares not as intense. And luckily in 2006, my wife came down and said, the girls and I wish you wouldn't do this. You're taking valuable time away from us. And man, that was like a lightning bolt to my heart. I never went down there to get, drunk. I went down there hoping in my own mind, I was trying to reason that if I slept better, maybe tomorrow would be better. And now I know that was a form of self-medication. And, I learned that through counseling now. And back then I thought it was a sign of weakness to ask for help. And, I was ashamed that I just couldn't handle my symptoms. But now I know it's a sign of strength to ask for help, and it's nothing to be ashamed of.
Right.
And that's part of the reason we did the book, not only to bring awareness to PTSD, that you can get PTSD from any life-threatening trauma. And in fact, car crashes is one of the leading causes of PTSD.
Right.
But it's not only from war, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, everybody in the park tonight, either themselves or a loved one, are going through some struggle, whether it's emotional or physical. I mean, we all go through stuff, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. And, if we can share in our story and if people can learn from my mistakes, that's the whole reason we wrote the book. And
you mentioned reading that article, and there were 12 symptoms, and you said that all of them hit home except for 2. Obviously, the nightmares were one. What were some of the other ones that really hit home with you?
Oh, gosh. There was times where I had depression, anxiety, trembling, feeling isolation. There were just so many different ones from there were just so many ones that there are different forms of really just different forms of depression.
Mm-hmm.
And drinking. Like I said, there were times that I would drink thinking that in my own mind it was helping me not only relax at that time, but hopefully, I knew every night, just as the sun was going to go down, I was going to have a nightmare. It was just a question of how many there were. And I slept with the TV on when I was in college, so that when I screamed at night, my roommates say, "What the hell was that?" I'd say it was the TV. Mm. Or at home, when my mom would come in the bedroom, "Are you okay?" I'd say it's the TV. And then I'd wake my wife up or the kids. I'd try to blame the TV. And, PTSD affects your whole family and your loved ones. It doesn't just affect you. And I tried to protect my family the best way I could. And, now I know a lot of those times I failed, even though I did what I thought best at the time, and I wish I would have done counseling sooner. Counseling's not easy. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but it changed my world for the better. It helped me be a better dad. It helped me be a better father and a better person, a better husband. And like I say, it's nothing to be ashamed of.
And obviously, when you talk about it's a sign of strength to actually ask for help, talk to me about that process of, you have the realization point with your family, and then how long between that realization point to actually seeking the help and being in a room with someone that can help you. How long was that process in between? And then how much time did it take before you actually felt like you were feeling better?
For years, before I asked my wife to marry me, before we were married, before each of our children were born, I would rehearse out loud in the car, driving to work, to pick her up. How could I find the right words to explain all my raw, buried emotions and triggers? Because, she was my best friend. I thought I owed it to her, so she knew what was going on. And yet I thought, if I don't find just the right words and explain this right, maybe she'd leave me. I didn't give her the credit that she deserved for being the incredible person she mm-hmm. is. And yet when I found that article, I knew that was another aha moment. It gave me courage. I went home that day and said, "Honey, we got to talk." And all those things I had feared that she might say, she didn't. She said, "Honey, I love you. We'll get through this together. Let's call your doctor. Let's go to Mass General tomorrow." And I walked in Mass General the next day with my hat pulled down, looking down, just hoping no one would recognize me and say, "Hey, Dave, what are you doing here?" Mm-hmm. And now I'm proud to be a PTSD survivor. I'm happy to share my story. And when I went in to see the counselor, I didn't know what they would ask, but I was willing to be an open book. Before we started writing the book in 2010 in January, when my wife and daughter said, "If you would have read a book with someone going through similar challenges, would it have helped you and inspired you?" I said, "I think it would." And they said, "Well, why don't you write your story? And if it helps one person, it's worth doing." Mm-hmm. And back then when I started writing it was before I went through counseling, and I just did the facts because I didn't want to show any emotion, have my voice crack, because back then I thought it was a sign of weakness. And when I started doing counseling, there were times, man, it was tough. And part of my counseling, I had to write out all my raw, buried emotions. And initially I started doing it literally on paper. And sometimes the paper would be so soaked from my tears, I'd have to start over. And I had to write out my raw, buried emotions for each trauma. And then I'd have to read it to myself and then read it out loud to my counselor. And each of these steps were to desensitize all these raw, buried emotions. Mm-hmm. And, reading it to yourself is one level, and then reading it out loud is another level. And slowly that desensitizes those. And then February 25th, I started counseling literally the next day in September 2010. And then February 25th, 2011, I slept through the night for 7 hours for the first time in 29 years without a nightmare. And I felt like jumping up and down on the bed like Tom Cruise at Oprah.
Yeah.
I was so excited, but I'm so superstitious.
Right.
I didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
I wanted to wake up. I wanted my wife to wake up and say, honey, you won't believe what just happened.
Right.
And the next night, I slept through the night. And then the next night, I slept through the night. And I had realized before that, talking through therapy, I went for an hour on Mondays and an hour and a half every Friday. And then every day I worked on reading what I had written and working on new traumas, working and writing those. And I realized even more that counseling was working.
So do you think that, obviously it was therapeutic for you to write the book, but do you think the most difficult, I guess, time during that whole timeline to revisit, was it when you were talking about how there was that one time that you were in so much pain that you just didn't want to wake up the next day? Do you think that was the hardest part to revisit in your mind?
That was certainly one of them. I think that was one of the, there was a time after my knee replacement when I just had so much pain that I felt like I was a burden to my family.
Well, because the knee replacement, they told you, like, you're too young to have this surgery, and whose call was it? Was it you just saying just do it anyway, or were they at a point where, like, where our hands are tied, it doesn't matter how old he is, we've got to do this?
My knee was in such bad shape. I was 36, and normally, back then they did knee replacements when you were 65, 75.
Right.
And they said, your knee only has so many bends in it before you'll have to have another knee replacement. And at that time, they told me you have 2 knee replacements in your life before you have to fuse your leg straight. And I was in so much pain that I was missing my children's lives. Mm-hmm. And I thought I had to make a choice of missing quality life with my kids now, where if it meant in the future I was going to have my leg fused, I needed to have time with my family now. Mm-hmm. So they agreed that the condition my knee needed it, and if that was a choice I had to make, I had to make it. But then we had so many complications because I had I think 15 knee surgeries before the knee replacement. There was so much scar tissue in there that the knee froze up, and I was just in excruciating pain that I didn't I prayed one night that I wouldn't wake up in the morning and that God take care of my family. And when I woke up, I just felt unbelievable guilt that I would have done that to my family, because I knew what it was like to not have a dad growing up. And I was just felt so much shame that I even contemplated. I mean, I didn't want to do suicide myself, but I just felt so bad that I even thought about putting my family in that situation, asking God to, it was all right with me if I didn't wake up.
Right. So if that was the lowest point, was the highest point Drago?
Oh yeah, Drago. He'll be out here shortly. He's with my wife right now. Drago's been an important part of my life. Other than my wife, he's my best friend. Mm-hmm. He has touched my life in ways I never could have imagined. He's a medical tool in ways that he gives me confidence every day to take on challenges. He interrupts any anxiety. He's trained in task to interrupt anxiety to get me to focus on him. When I had that nightmare, I've had 2 nightmares since February 25th, 2011, and both times were in November of 2015, and Drago jumped on the bed, woke me up right away.
So they can tell.
Yeah, he's amazing. He, if he was here now and he thought I had anxiety, he would get my lap and lean his head into me. It's called deep compression therapy. Get me to focus on him. He is absolutely amazing.
So how did the pairing come together? Was this something where you asked like a doctor, like, hey, like these are my symptoms. Can you pair me with a dog? Or like, what was the process like trying to find him?
You know, my wife had talked to me about a service dog, and you know, for years, I think if someone would have, if anybody, even my wife, would ask me about having a service dog, I would have been too self-conscious. I would have thought that would have had people looking at me and judging me.
Yeah.
And she said, you know, I think this could help you, and just be another medical tool, another part of your healing. And so we started exploring. She grew up with shepherds and believed in their temperament and their confidence. And so we started exploring shepherds and as a breed, and found an incredible trainer to help us with that. And then the trainer also not only trained me, but trained my wife and daughter, so that they would also have the same commands. If if he's not with me for some reason, that they're following that consistent training. But other than rain games, when Drago usually stays in the office, there's sometimes he's in the dugout, but he's usually with me pretty much 24/7.
And that's so cool. And like the Red Sox have obviously been great about it, where they'll just be like, yeah, whatever you need. It's obviously a great pairing. And what was that like? You weren't hesitant to ask the team. You obviously at the time were figuring that they would be receptive to the idea, right?
Yeah, you know, legally, a service dog can go wherever their partner goes.
Yeah.
But it was certainly something that, you know, I talked to our HR department, and I talked to my boss and said how important he's going to be in my life, and that, you know, I'd appreciate their support. It's certainly something that to make it successful for Drago and for me, but also for the Red Sox, I wanted to make sure that he experienced Fenway gradually.
Yep.
So from the smells of just walking around the field, to the sounds of the PA system, to the crack of the bat, to all that, to the noise of the fans, we gradually built into it versus just, hey, here it is. And I think that added to the success.
And he's basically become like the team dog. Like all the players like love Drago. That's kind of like a staple now. If a guy comes over, you got traded to the Red Sox, here's Drago. It's kind of like part of like the starter kit. Like this is the Green Monster, like that's Jersey Street, that's Drago. It's part of like the welcoming package.
Yeah, he's fun. You know, it's some visiting players will come over to the office to see him. And he
who's his favorite?
Oh, gosh, you know, he's real tight with Rick Porcello, Brock, a lot of guys. Lance McCullers will come over from visiting teams. You know, Rocco made sure to say hi when he was here.
Yeah.
A lot of guys go out of their way to say hi to Drago.
So you obviously, the second accident happened when you were in Milwaukee. How did you end up here? How is that process of, okay, I was living with my brother, I was working for the Brewers, but I mean, I'm a Red Sox fan at heart, and my dream job would be to come to Boston. Like, talk to me about how that came to be.
Gosh, it just came out of the blue. We had literally just moved into Miller Park. You know, I loved Milwaukee. Had some opportunities to go to some different parks and stayed in Milwaukee. In fact, the Cincinnati Reds had called. My wife and I are both from Ohio, and had given us an opportunity to manage they just taken out the AstroTurf at Old Riverfront, and we're building the new park, and offered that job to us. And
didn't the Yankees call too?
the Yankees called, back in maybe '88.
Yeah.
And I was very humbled that Mr. Steinbrenner reached out, but that did not.
Was that a face-to-face conversation?
No, that was not. We didn't.
Was this over the phone?
Decided to not even go.
Got it.
To New York.
I love that. Like, one of the things that I thought was really cool was it was almost like some of the recruiting process for you, now that you had established yourself, like you were a name in the industry, to where it almost felt like a recruitment of like a free agent player. Like it's how about like you treat like your family. Like you talked about how like some of the teams that wanted you to come work for their grounds crew and be at the head of it, they were like, yeah, like I appreciate how some of these teams were treating my family personally.
Yeah, I was very humbled. Billy Bean could not have been nicer, and how much respect he had for my family. I was really appreciative of that. Brewers, Mr. Selig was incredibly great with my family. When the Red Sox brought me out here, they said, David, this is not an interview. We know what you can do for us. More importantly, what can we do for Denise and the girls to make this move successful?
Yeah.
And, that when Mr. Mooney called out of the blue in November of 2000, that literally, I was just so surprised when the phone rang.
And you were there for 1 year before the new ownership group came in. Like, did you for any second be like, oh, I mean, like, this is my dream job I have for 1 year. These are new owners. Like, are they going to want, are they going to want turnover over here? Or were you just like, it's completely different?
Well, you never know when new ownership comes in.
Yeah.
There's always that uncertainty. I wanted to work hard to, prove myself to them just like I wanted to prove myself to previous ownership.
Was there any conversation when they first came in with you?
I wanted to prove that I deserve the opportunity.
So one of the cool stories that you had in the book was about Nomar, who is the most like superstitious, anal person, especially as a player. Obviously, there was a story in there about like was it Jimmy Williams or Joe Kerrigan that wanted the grass higher?
Oh, Jimmy Williams.
So Jimmy Williams wanted the grass higher to slow the balls down in the infield, and then Nomar comes in. He's like, the grass is too high. Like we need to cut that down. And then what's the rule? It's you can only cut it a half an inch at a time.
Oh, so Nomar was hurt the first half of the year in 2001, and so the infielders were older and didn't have the same range.
Yeah.
And so the grass was.
Was that like Andy Sheets or something?
Mike Lansing, and Jose Offerman, I think, were the infielders. And so they asked if the infield could be taller, and so we raised the mower, and Nomar came back at the All-Star break, and Nomar was great, and after his first workout, he said, David, the grass is pretty tall. And I said, yeah, it's for the guys that didn't have your range when you were gone.
Right.
And he goes, hey, I'm going to be playing in 2 days. Any chance it can be shorter for tomorrow's workout? I said, sure. Dan Duquette said, hey, you keep Nomar happy, I'm happy.
Right.
And I said, sure, no problem. And so the rule of thumb is you don't want to cut off more than 1/3 of the grass blade at any one time, or you're going to stress it. Well, it was July, and, you do what you got to do. And so we cut it, and sure enough, by the next morning, it looked kind of the same color as Pesky's pole.
Yeah.
And so before anybody got in, I put a little green magic dye on it, put a backpack blower on it, and dried it. Nomar came in and said, man, this looks great.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Nomar. Appreciate that.
He couldn't have been nicer about it.
Who is the most particular player in terms of like how they like their infield grass?
Oh, gosh. Nobody comes to mind. I welcome and value their feedback.
Yeah.
Whether it's, hey, I like it like that, or if they got constructive criticism, I want that feedback. Our job's to tailor it to what they want, whether they want it more moisture, less top dressing, taller grass. We're here to work with them.
Yeah, and how I mean, like, I feel like it's such a I guess a detailed process to stay on top of something like this. Is it really? Do you consider it like a 24/7 job?
It really is. Especially dealing with New England weather, it changes so much. And other than my wife and Drago, the last thing I look at before I go to sleep is weather. The first thing I look at, other than them in the morning, is weather. We've got great weather apps right now that we can look at. We got great weather services.
I bug you all the time for the weather. I'm like, hey Dave, what's the deal with this rain delay? Are we gonna get this game in tonight? Jared, I'm working. We'll talk later.
I've got great coworkers. It's a lot of attention to detail. Shout out to them for all their work.
Yeah, I mean, before I even met you, I would have to say your name all the time because people, if there was rain in the forecast, people would be like, "Hey, Jared, are they going to be able to get this game in tonight?" I'm like, I'm not David Mellor. Like, how could I possibly know that? Like, I just write about the Red Sox and I talk about them. I have no idea how weather works. I don't know if they're going to be able to get this game in. When you first came here, there was one of those stories, because that was one of the stories like my dad used to tell me about how like when it rained in here and then it would flood and then there would be fish Like, where would they be? Like on the outfield warning track or in the dugout? Where was that? Like, because that was a real thing. That it sounded like an urban legend or like a myth. It was not.
That is a true story. So the first day I sat down with Joe Mooney in January of 2001, we were talking about how ballparks are similar and different. And the field back then had an 18-inch crown to it. So a big crown because the last time there was a major field renovation was 1934.
Long time ago.
And it did not have subsurface drainage.
That was Steve Buckley's first season.
So the water would come off that crown and it would flood the dugouts. So he said, David, the dugouts would flood if it rains hard. And I had seen that in Milwaukee and a couple places and didn't think much about it. So I said, all right, Mr. Mooney. And he said, if it really, really rains hard, the storm drain system on Yawkey Way at that time can't handle a heavy rainstorm. And the water will back up from the drains under the street and the third base concourse will flood through the manhole covers. Yeah. I thought, that's pretty heavy. And he says, if it really, really, really fucking rains hard, the first base camera pit will fill all the way to the top with water, and fish from the Charles River will swim through the city drain pipes and swim out on the field. And I said, no way. And out of respect, I just, I said, wow, that's incredible, Mr. Mooney.
Yeah.
Went home and told my wife, you won't believe the stories that Mr. Mooney tells.
Right.
Well, that year we opened on a Monday in early April. And on Friday night, we were supposed to get 2 to 3 inches of rain. So we put the tarp on. Sure enough, by sunrise, we had close to 3 inches of rain. I walked out by the third base dugout and walked behind home plate and got by the first base dugout. And sure enough, there was a fish on the edge of the grass about that long. I thought I was getting punked and set up 3 months in advance by Mr. Mooney.
Right.
I looked up in the upper deck and yelled his name, and he was nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
I walked to the camera pit. Sure enough, it was full of water. And between the camera pit and where the second baseman stands, there were 7 more fish.
That's incredible. And how did they fix that? Or when did they fix that?
Well, current ownership is invested over $300 million in improvements. And one of the things they did, they put in a new camera pit. And when they excavated the old one out, there was a drain line in there that was supposed to have a valve in it that would let water out and close behind it, but it was half full of sediment, so fish could always come in and out. So no fish since that got repaired.
The first fish that you saw, you definitely should have framed it. You should have put it up there.
I have a picture of it, but in the rush of getting ready for opening day, the fish got thrown away. But I wish I would have dry mounted one for my office, for his office, for ownership.
That's like an all-time thing to just have your first Fenway fish. So you talk about the new ownership. So you had started here in 2001. They were not doing concerts back then.
Right.
So now, as they're trying to generate more revenue, and it's cool. I mean, I've been to a couple concerts here. How much stress is that when it's like, hey, the Red Sox are going on the road, or in the off season when it's like, hey, can you actually build like a skating rink out there, and maybe could you do like a ski jump while you're at it? Like how much more? I guess, like, how much more difficult is that for you to add on top of what you're already responsible for?
Well, it certainly adds to the challenge, but, it's a great opportunity for people to create memories.
Yeah.
And that's one of the best parts of my job is being behind the scenes and part of the team that does that. There's a lot of planning and a lot of support that goes into that. Those big events are planned months, if not years in advance. And so there's a lot of teamwork that goes into that. Weather impacts certainly some of the results afterwards, but we go in with contingency plans, whether it's sod afterwards that we need, but we stay up to date on new technology to protect the field or renovate the field afterwards. When we have these winter events and fall events, part of those are a planned resod in the spring. So I think like I say, it's a lot of teamwork, and I'm really proud of the team that puts that together, whether it's in-house support from the front office and my crew and the vendors that we work with to, people like Live Nation that works with us. It's a real group effort.
Yeah, I mean, you guys do an incredible job. I mean, I remember there was, when they first started doing them, you could tell, like, you could tell where the stage was in, like, center field or whatever it was, and then over time it's just like, yeah, you couldn't tell that there was a concert here. Like, Zach Brown was here, 2 nights ago? You couldn't tell. Like, how did you sort, like, was it like a I mean, that's not something you can train for. Like when you're doing a job like this, how did you get better at just disguising that there was a concert here a few days ago? Because I remember Paul McCartney was here in 2008, I want to say 2008, 2009.
I think the first show was 03.
Yeah, it was one of the earlier ones. You could tell that there was a concert there. Now you can't tell. How was that like a learn on the fly thing? Like, how did you?
Well, safety and playability is always our first priority. There may be some times where aesthetically you may still see some stress. We always make sure it's flat, safe, and playable. Aesthetically, like I say, you may see some imperfections.
There's no imperfections here.
But we always we work with newer technology when we can to try to push that envelope. We're proud to be in the yes business to help accommodate those new opportunities. And like I say, it's fun, whether it's a softball game, a corporate function, a big event, the Who, Harvard, Yale, upcoming bowl games. It's great to see people, having a good time.
July 24th, 2004. Does that date ring a bell to you?
Sure.
So that day, everyone remembers that day for the Veritek A-Rod fight, the Bill Mellor walk-off. Not many people remember that game almost wasn't played because of rain, and that was before the new drainage system.
Right.
That was right before that. Were there helicopters on the field drying the field before? Was that something that actually happened?
So we've certainly used helicopters on the old field.
Yeah.
The downdraft from a helicopter, I think, is like 170 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And so there were times we brought in helicopters to kind of try to help
accelerate the drying process.
Yeah, kind of big hair dryer.
How close were we to not playing the game that day? And what were some of the conversations that took place? Who was in them? Who wanted the game to be played? Who didn't want the game to be played? Like, how close were we to not having that piece of Red Sox history?
I don't remember anybody, there being anyone who said, hey, I don't want to play. The goal is always to get 9 innings in and to make sure things are safe and playable. And on that old field, is how much time do we need and can we get it safe and playable, making sure it would drain. Not only we have had the water table from below was also an issue. And so it's just making sure we could get that, the root zone, which was a heavy silt soil, just trying to get that water to get out of there.
And there were, according to the legends, the players they wanted to play. They didn't care what condition the field was in. They wanted the Yankees. They wanted them that day. Were there any of the guys that came up to you? They were like, "Hey, Dave, we need to get this field ready to go. Like we got a ball game to win today."
I don't remember anyone specifically, saying that. I just remember it was, "Hey, let's do everything we can to get this in."
Yeah, and obviously the rest is history. Do you have a favorite moment on the job at Fenway?
Gosh, there's so many. Absolutely so many. Man, I remember the first day I walked out here. Every day I walk out here, I still get goosebumps. Growing up in my backyard, I emulated, from Jim Rice to Fred Lynn to Louis Tiant to thinking my little fence was the Green Monster. Fenway means so much to my family. And, I'm a proud card-carrying member of Red Sox Nation.
And you've been here through 4 championships. Was there anyone that when you first got here, there's like, hey, enjoy it, but you're never going to see a championship? Were you one of those fans that? Because I remember when I was in high school, my sophomore year math teacher, I saw how much of a diehard Red Sox fan that I was. But he was like, yeah, just enjoy them during the summer and know that they're never going to win. Just don't invest yourself emotionally in the playoffs. You're only going to get your heart broken. They're fun to watch in the summer, but they're never going to win one. Did you ever think that you would have seen 4?
Gosh, I just remember looking at the pennants when I came here and just thought, man, it'd be awesome to be here when they win one.
Yeah. And
it wasn't if they win one, it's just when they win one, I was hoping I'd be here.
Yeah.
And to be here when they've won 4, it's incredible.
Yeah. I remember I was here when they won in 13, and I was doing a TV hit for NECN the next morning, and I came in at like, I don't know, maybe 8 in the morning or something like that, and there was still just like beer cans everywhere. I think there was like one of like the numbers in the scoreboard was missing. What was that? That's just like a fun cleanup. Like that's just one of those where it's like, yeah, you know, like obviously during the season you want people off the grass, you don't want any problems over here, but when there's a championship being celebrated, you kind of just, do you still get anxiety when people are like running around crazy on the field?
No, that's a great,
because the duck boat for the parade in 13 tore up the grass.
Yeah, they
got stuck.
The previous
13
year. Was it 13? Yeah, 13 it got stuck. Yeah, the semi got stuck.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of a better reason to fix the field than a duck boat.
Yeah, a nice little championship cleanup. Did you get to be in the parade?
Yeah, I was very, very humbled to have that opportunity. It was
Which
incredible.
one? All of them?
Yeah, I've been opportunity to be in
What was
all
your
of them.
favorite parade?
Gosh, they were all incredible. The last one, Drago got to be in with me, and so
Yes.
that was incredible, and you know they were all incredible.
So
Absolutely incredible.
I've been following you on Instagram for a while now, and when they have these concerts, one of the things I notice is that people will drop like the ashes in the grass.
Yeah.
Like they'll have like the urns and they'll drop like ashes. They obviously don't realize that like, doesn't it kill the grass?
It does. Ashes have a lot of salt in the human body.
Yeah.
And people don't, I mean, it's really not pleasant for cleanup or, I mean, it's just not good. It kills the grass in 24 hours.
In 24 hours?
Yeah.
Is that like an every concert thing?
No, fortunately it's not. You know, the Grateful Dead, they were dead. Talk about a dead show. There were eight piles then.
Yeah, I figured that. I was gonna guess like out of all like the bands that have been here, what's the one that drew the most like ashes spreading?
Yeah, but that's really not pleasant.
Yeah, I would say that's probably one of the downsides. One of the other things that you do is you like to take pictures of the imprints on the green monster. Who do you think has the most dents on this wall?
I try not to use the word dent after good old Bucky, but
yeah, that's true.
Otherwise, there's a few other words with it.
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know. There's some doozies up there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that up above's been there. That surf has been there since '76.
Has it really?
So I don't know.
Huh.
Right now, who do you think hits the hardest?
Honestly, on this team,
Yeah.
I think Chavis hits the ball the hardest.
Wow.
Like watching him in batting practice, I audibly laugh when he takes batting practice because everything clears the monster by several feet.
Wow.
Yeah, I think like JD, Bogarts hits a lot of them. Mookie hits the ball hard, but like in terms of who's putting the most dents in there in BP, if he actually hits it, because most of the time he just goes over it, I think it's Chavis.
Wow. That's interesting.
Who's one guy who's no longer with the team that you built a relationship with and you keep in touch most frequently?
Oh gosh, Torey Lavello.
Yeah.
I think really highly of him.
Everyone liked him.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, he was more like a player manager. Like everyone's like, that's the guy that you go to. Even when like Farrell was here, they were like, that's, you know, if there's an issue, that's the guy that you go to.
Yeah, he's a good guy. There's a lot of them.
Is it weird for you, like having come in and be like, Mr. Mooney, that was my mentor, that was my guy, knowing that now you're probably that guy for a lot of people?
Oh gosh, I'm humbled to think that. You know, if like I say, if I can help one person, you know, learn from me or learn from my mistakes, that's the least I can do.
Where can people find the book?
The book's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Red Sox Team Store.
Yep. Oh, they have it here.
Yeah, they have it at the Team Store. And, you know, like I say, our goal is to help people learn from our journey. You know, it's not just a PTSD book. We also want to bring awareness to how life-changing, amazing service dogs are. But we just want to help break the stigma of asking for help and encourage people to not give up. You know, I think of all the things if I would have missed, if I would have given up along the way.
Right.
You know, I think I'm the luckiest guy in the world. You know, I never would have met my amazing wife, have 2 amazing daughters in my life, have a career I enjoy. Heck, I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't have learned and had all that adversity shape me. But to just think of all the things in life you'd miss if you give up along the way.
Oh, yeah, big time. And that's kind of where we started, where I said, you know, your goal originally was to make it to the big leagues, and you did.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't in the way that you had originally intended, but you still made it. It's not like, oh, I need to shift paths and like I'm giving up on a dream. I mean, you made it to the big leagues. Like, you are here, you're the guy, and everyone knows you for that. And now I hope that they know you for other things too. If they have a chance to read the book, I mean, it's just, it gives a whole different perspective on life. It's a great read. I very much recommend it. One base at a time. You have to sign my book. I'm not letting you leave until you sign it. I want you to sign it for me because now I have a physical copy.
I'm humbled by all your support, man. I appreciate it.
David Mellor. If you're at Fenway, you've seen him before. Make sure you say hi. Now you're part of the Section 10 family, so you're gonna have a lot of people like in Section 10 shirts, like asking you for pictures. 1,000%. Thank you so much. We're gonna have to do this again sometime.
That'd be great. You're
Absolutely.
always welcome.
Thank you so much.
All right, man. Thank you.